From ELCA Advocacy, this is Here I Pod. There's so much happening in our communities every week and every day that are impacted by policies at the local, state, and federal levels. Here I Pod will focus on one aspect of what's happening each episode by talking with faith-based advocates, as well as providing steps that you can take in your own advocacy efforts. In episode 10, our final episode for season 1, host Regina Banks speaks with the Rev Amy Reumann, Senior Director of Witness in Society. They discuss how Witness in Society fits into the rest of the ELCA and alongside other faith-based partners, as well as how the work of advocacy has changed, different forms of activism, and much more. After the interview, we'll hear first from Hunger Advocacy Fellow Joey Chen, who will discuss the Lutheran history of ecumenical partnership in the United States and abroad. Then from Kathryn Lohre of the ELCA's Ecumenical and Interreligious Relations Office about the ELCA's role as bridge builder in today's political and social climate. Finally, our host, Regina Banks, returns to share her own faith reflection to cap off the season. Here's Regina to get us started.
This afternoon, I have with me the Rev Amy Reumann, Senior Director of Witness in Society of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. How are you this afternoon, Amy?
Hi, Regina. I'm delighted to be here, especially on this last of this series, inaugural series, and standing on the shoulders of everyone who has put this together, dreamed, planned, invited, persisted, and brought this new way of connecting, learning, and accompanying one another as advocates, as faith leaders in the ELCA.
So let's start off by orienting people a little bit. Where does Witness in Society sit structurally and spiritually within the ELCA's ecosystem? And how is its work connected to congregational life, synod, the wider church organization? Like where are we?
I'll start, and then if I don't cover one of those, you can call me back. First, I'd say in Witness in Society, we rarely sit. We're usually running through the capitals, state and federal capitals, the halls of the UN, connecting and amplifying the voice of Lutherans. Structurally, we sit in the Service and Justice unit of the ELCA, which means we are part of the church's service and justice witness as we work through world hunger and Lutheran disaster response, as we accompany communities globally through our global mission colleagues, as we work with diverse cultures and communities here in the United States, as we implement the Amparo strategy and the Samud strategy, respectively, and with people who are migrating and with our partners in the Middle East. And so we are the amplification of these good relationships and the justice concerns that arise in the daily course of our global mission work, our domestic policy work, as communities experience inequity, poverty, injustice in many different forms. We come alongside. So we're together in that unit, but we relate across the ELCA, especially think of ecumenical and interreligious affairs, because our advocacy is, we're Lutherans doing advocacy, but we are doing it in partnership with many other faith communities, and that's informed and enriched by one another.
Wonderful. You've led Witness in Society through multiple shifts, political, denominational, theological. We've had a couple of reorganizations in there. What grounding principles have remained consistent in our public witness that you've noticed?
Yeah. Well, first I would say when I came on board, before I came on board, it was the Lutheran Office on Governmental Affairs, which is an important capacity for the church to have. And then it became ELCA Advocacy. And then a few years ago, Witness in Society. And I think this latest name change shows an important awareness that anyone and everyone can do advocacy. But as Christians, we are particularly witnessing to our faith in society, particularly around public policy. That's the sphere of our group. We're not the only group in the church charged with some kind of a faith witness, but we are doing it particularly in this sphere. So I actually think it's a helpful refinement and encouragement. And that also, it's not just our job to witness on behalf of others, but it's providing the support, the awareness, the connections to help Lutherans be advocates wherever they are on what's of concern in their communities. So I think that's a constant that we've seen across. I think some of the pillars that remain is, first of all, any witnessing that we do, any advocacy is, of course, rooted in our social teaching. We've heard that come up on some of the past episodes that you've done. The one on climate advocacy is, of course, rooted in our social statement on care for creation and our social message on Earth's climate crisis. And so all of us here on staff, many of whom have been featured in these talks, are experts really on their area. And what does it mean not just to have these wonderful statements written, but we're applying them all the time to our discernment. And so we're guided by our theology, our history, our understanding of Scripture, and the communal discernment that as Lutherans we continue to exercise. What else has stayed constant, I think, is the commitment to accompaniment. And in fact, I would say that's grown stronger. Since we became Witness in Society, and now we're in this unit in the ELCA with hunger and all of the programs we support around the world and in the United States, what we learn from walking with those communities, that's to say domestically, that why so many congregations are coming to the ELCA looking for grants on housing, because housing is a major driver of hunger. And so lo and behold, our advocacy, as you know, Regina, on the state level, work on legislation like Yes in God's Backyard, and churches being involved in being providers of housing and advocates for affordable, accessible housing. And so that's rooted in our hunger work, or our climate work being rooted in Lutheran disaster response, as we see communities globally and around the U.S. as they get devastated by floods, by hurricanes, by tornadoes, all amplified by changing climate. Our advocacy is drawing on those stories and experiences to advocate for, both for cleanup and rebuilding that's resilient. And so it is a beautiful thing, and it's a real honor to work together with colleagues with these programs of the church to bring the advocacy piece alongside the ministries that are happening.
I know that at Churchwide Assembly, there's going to be consideration of the newest social statement, and you were staff liaison. You were part of the construction of that a new social statement on civic life and faith. Can you tell us a little bit about that process and what need that statement is attempting to fill?
Well, it was an honor to be an advisor, which meant that while I had some voice, bringing the experience of how the ELC's advocacy ministry and our relationship with government has been conducted. It was the task force, made the hard calls and decisions, and brought us this final text that will be considered. What we have is a new social statement topping off, I'm going to say it's around 50 pages. So I hope it will be accessible in that we have what we call the short catechism and the long catechism of it. And that while there's a longer body where you can get really deep, there's what we call, a shorter executive summary, really, that has a few sentences for each area. So one can skim it and get the gist of what's happening. One can also delve deeper. And then there's an extensive glossary so that we're defining terms like Christian nationalism. And so that we have some definitions for the church. I'm wildly excited about this and about having it, because I think Lutherans, while we have wonderful theology around, the two kingdoms or the two realms or God's two hands, however you choose to express that, there's still a lot of confusion of what that actually means concretely in the United States, in this form of government that we have. And so really for the first time, we have some, within our social teaching, we assess our form of government. How do we understand, the role of government, how God's power is exemplified through God, the actions of government, how God cares for us through government. So we have this very high positive view, but then also how God calls government to account and what our role is in that. But particularly looking at the question of political authority in the United States and the framework that the Constitution provides for us. One of the things I really like is that it says that the most radical feature of the Constitution were the first three words, we the people and what that meant at the time, but also how we claim that now, bringing this amazing diversity of this country into what the text calls mutual self-determination. So in other words, it's not just about my own well-being, that we're not called into this country just to look out for ourselves, but we mutually agree, through policies, through practices, to try to seek the good of all. And that's how we understand our role as Christians. So I think for anyone looking to, what does it mean to be a Christian in society? What does it mean to be a voter? What does it mean to be someone who cares about the well-being of my neighbor? It's going to give us a lot of tools, as well as, I think, some ways to grapple with some things that we haven't had social teaching on before. So what is Christian nationalism? And what is patriotism? How do we understand them as the ELCA? And where's the line between a healthy patriotism of loving, honoring, country and community, and where does it cross the line to idolatry of mistaking your country for a god, or believing that God has somehow given this nation something that allows us to oppress or control or subjugate others? So there's other teaching in there that I think will be really, really helpful. Political polarization. So it addresses that. We know it's not good, right? But it gives us some language and guidance for how do we deal with this in congregations. It talks about, there's a section on money and politics. How are we to understand? And it does not answer them, but I mean, social teaching is for us to continue to discuss and debate what's in it. And I think it will give us some tools for that going forward.
Yes, definitely. So those of us who are professional advocates in the ELCA, working in Witness in Society, we use this to guide our daily working lives, and this is how we use it. But how would you like for congregations, synods, members to use all of our social teaching and this one as well, if and when it becomes a part of our canon?
Yeah. Well, I think they can be slightly intimidating documents. They are wordy, and I think that can be a barrier to their use. I think the more recent study guides that have been put out, there are study guides for all of them, but the more recent ones have had more video components. And I think that's made them much more usable. And I know there's going to be something developed fairly rapidly, knock on wood, that will come out so that people can begin to use this. I remember at the churchwide assembly where this was passed, there was discussion about an urgency that people wanted this, and it's going to take 5 years, and which is why there was first a social message created on discipleship in a democracy. So creating some basic understandings that we could use right away, and then this lengthier document comes alongside us. I've seen creative things done with the social teaching. I know you can chunk it up and use it in adult ed over many weeks, and the way the articles are arranged in this, there's broader headings. There's still the study guide for the earlier draft that's available online. I know people are still using that now. Also has videos and great discussion questions. And I've also seen them turned into devotions, and to find ways to pray about our civic life, about our government, about what God is seeking in the common good. And so there's all sorts of ways that you can use them.
What is the unique role of the church, not just Christians, but the institutional church in this time of growing polarization, disinformation, civic erosion?
That's actually another part of the social statement I did. There's a section on misinformation, and what does it mean to tell the truth at this time, and calling us to vigilance, as well as to media and organizations to also do their part. So if you can remember back to the election last year, in the months leading up to it, one thing that we heard over and over again is the importance of the church as a trusted messenger. And that, even when you look at those scales of, who's trusted in society, and you see many well-established professions, slipping down. And I believe faith leaders have also sometimes seen some erosion of that trust. There still is a value of the voice of faith institutions and faith leaders in these complex times. And so the church is a trusted messenger for getting out accurate information about the elections. And that's something that we leaned into last year. I think we still have to lean into that church as a trusted messenger in our communities around misinformation. That continues to go on. interpreting what is happening, in DC, in your states and in your communities, which sometimes is, what Luther called, calling a thing what it is, because sometimes it takes, there needs to be one person naming what actually goes on for it to be addressed and dealt with, whether it is, idolatry, whether it is, as we're staring down what may be huge, unprecedented, cuts to healthcare for low income people here in DC this week, or cuts to food assistance that could be just absolutely devastating. We're a trusted messenger who can stand up and say people will starve, people will die if we see cuts this draconian that we could be facing. And hopefully by the time this airs, maybe we'll have a different outcome. But we need to say in clear and bold ways what we see that's happening.
The ELCA partners with groups like the Baptist Joint Committee, the General Board of Church and Society of the United Methodist Church, and other faith-based advocates. What do those partnerships enable, or what do they do that we couldn't do alone?
It happens in a lot of ways. One is because we work together, we meet together, we have working groups that are based on issues where we'll have one of our Lutherans at the table, and we'll have a Methodist and a Presbyterian and people representing Jewish organizations and Roman Catholic and Muslim. First of all, we can share information. It's one person can't cover all of the housing or all of the hunger work that's going on. So there's ability to coordinate, to inform one another, to meet in different offices and come back and share, to talk about strategy, to chew on things. And while we as Lutherans may then go to the ELCA and encourage action, we'd be talking about it as Lutherans to Lutherans in ways that are hopefully motivational and inspirational. But we also know our Jewish partners are doing that. Our Muslim partners are doing that. Other mainline groups are doing that. I think it means we wrestle. Sometimes we may see something one way and have our own blinders on, and having that diversity of different faith groups in the room, people with different life experience, often from many different parts of this country or even world. You've got a lot of different perspectives, and it's that the give and take and the wrestling is what should we do at this time? What will be most effective? Or who can do what best? Some groups have stronger relationships in the districts that count on this. They can go do their thing. There are some groups at the table that are more activist focused, and they may be doing more of the let's have a rally or do something public on the outside. There's different caroms. There's different gifts, but the same spirit, I believe I read in scripture. And so who can do what best?
Amy, does Witness in Society make a distinction between activist work and advocacy work?
Well, I think I just did. I think in our there's many ways to do public witness, and we have a lot of tactics at our disposal. And I think sometimes it's the discerning of what will make the greatest impact at this moment. And sometimes it's several things at once. I'll just speak for the DC team here in Witness in Society. Our work is very much, it's the inside game. It is building relationships with administration, with Congress, members of Congress, with their staff in agencies, and over the long term and for the long haul. And so we need to have good relationships across the aisle, and constantly being working on that, because we can provide resources and stories and add value to the work that they're doing by bringing the perspectives, the experience of Lutherans and their partners to the work on the Hill, as well as the church's own values and commitments for justice. Activism, that is sometimes more of an outside game, which is bringing public pressure, mobilizing people, organizing. That has its own really important and distinct role. Sometimes both are needed. Usually both are needed, because often the story of an activist, a win, is also, there's a behind the scenes, sometimes years of work of moving policy, of deepening relationships, of quiet persuasion and prayer and presence that pay off. So we definitely need both. This team, though, in particular, in the work of the ELCA, is very much more to the side of policy work. There's plenty of other parts of the church, though, that are doing the organizing and the public work, the rallies, also have their own effect, as well as encouragement to people who that's their best option for having their voices heard.
Amy, the political winds have shifted in this country, and it is feeling more dangerous to speak out. So I have a kind of a two-part question, which is, what do you understand to be the risks and costs of speaking out as a public church right now? And are you holding space for lament in this?
I'll answer. I'll address those in order. I mean, so as a church, we continue our public witness. I know that there's been a chilling effect on free speech in this country for people who are not citizens. We've seen that impact, and it is quite frightening to see what has happened. At the same time, though, as a church, we still understand that we have the space and the obligation uh, to speak publicly around issues of importance. And so I don't see that stopping. I think we have to be very savvy about how we speak, what language we use, because we also want what we say to be heard. And we have advocacy that's facing, the hills over there. It's facing towards Congress, and we're, in the Capitol every single day doing visits. There's also advocacy in the church that we have to do because there's still many for whom it's not been a part of their catechesis or their faith formation. I think the role of lament is foundational in, well, the Christian life and any kind of life in society. And lament is part of the language of faith. I think that we echo the Psalms, we echo the lament of God's people as, saying, God, are you there? God, do you hear me? God, are you with me and with us? But I think so often biblical scholars have shown lament's not an end in itself. Right? Lament brings us together. Communal lament is so powerful. We just passed the 5th anniversary of the murder of George Floyd, and the public lament that grew up about that, the impact that has had, the way it's drawn together communities of support, of resistance, of hope. And so I think lament does ultimately, I think, can help give birth to and strengthen our hope, because we have to, again, calling a thing what it is. Let's say this is terrible. Let's say I'm hurting, someone's hungry, someone's grieving. It's in the naming of that we can begin to perhaps find then a common language for, well, what do we do now? What does God want us to do now?
What is the boldest, most hopeful ideas you've seen on the horizon for Witness in Society or the church's public engagement as a whole? I know that most of our previous interviewees, we've talked about their reactions to what has happened since the first of the year. But if you could look forward and be bold and be brave, what do you see?
Well, first, I do have to say, I feel emboldened and hopeful by every single person that's been interviewed here and been part of this team, because they're doing the work every single day. And they bring their faith and their brilliance and their persistence to it of trying to find the way to reach the people who need to hear what the church has to say and the stories of the communities that we accompany. Actually, some of the things that I found particularly inspiring of late, there's the faith communities working together, but it's sometimes unaccustomed partnerships or unusual partnerships that I find energy and that I think can create an impact. So a few weeks ago, I met with representatives of veterans groups who were concerned of some of the same things that we're concerned about around health, around hunger, around the economy, around free speech. And it felt holy to hear their stories. And some were people of faith and some weren't, but they all valued community, and they all knew what it was like to give your commitment to someone or something bigger than you, and what that meant you could then therefore strive to do. I think this is really a time where, yes, we act as the church, but in a time where we're being isolated and either self-isolating or overwhelmed and not knowing what to do. To the extent that we can forge new relationships, especially sometimes with people that we might not otherwise, I think that's where the fabric of this society can stay connected. And we can do that in a very local level. It doesn't have to be fancy, but who do you need to know who's in your community? Is that big and bold? I don't know. I think it's basic and simple, but I think at this time to refuse to be separated and to strive to do the, understanding others, across the divides that we're told cannot be breached.
In a time when younger generations are skeptical of institutions, what does the ELCA have to offer them? And is that an opportunity for Witness in Society to reach some who might otherwise not be in congregations every Sunday?
I find it consistently that if I go to a congregation or if I speak to a group, and there's someone who's youth or young adult, they're either extremely excited to find out that this church not just supports people doing advocacy, but invests in it with staff and resources and training, because we see this as an important expression of faith individually and corporately. I think that's advocacy we need to continue to do in the church, because as I understand, young people are looking for that authenticity of, not just the, what do they call it? Well, not just, talking the talk, but walking the walk. And I think we're one way that the ELCA helps to do that. The other thing I would say is, while I think we have things to offer, I think we have a lot to learn. And as I've watched the Lutheran World Federation start an advocacy strategy that first had youth-led advocacy as one of its core pillars. That's in the back of my head all the time when I think about how we're deciding things, how we're doing things, where the youth and young adult voices that are helping to shape and drive and move things further. Because there's that urgency and that, sometimes idealism, and oh, that'll never work in the policy world. Well, guess what? You never know till you try. And if we really are a community of moral discernment, which is one of the things we aspire to as the ELCA, we really need to be listening to all voices in that. Last week, I was at the lobby day at the Lutheran Day at the Capitol for our Pennsylvania State Public Policy Office. And first of all, it was wonderful to see not just quite a number of youth there. There actually were school-age kids whose parents had taken them out of school for the day to see this, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade. It was excellent. I was part of leading a workshop on how to do a lobby visit. And, so we prepped them, we talked about how to do it and all the different parts that you had. And then let's practice. Well, when we said, who wants to volunteer to practice? The ones who raised their hands were 2 high school students who were there. And they hit that ball so far out of the park, it's still going. They had absorbed the policy points. They really didn't have time to prepare, but right off the bat, they told stories about one of them, the work that he did delivering food boxes to seniors, because it was on hunger funding in Pennsylvania. That their state food purchase program was the issue we were visiting on. And he told this story so beautifully, so effectively, so movingly. I was supposed to be the unreceptive staffer, and I was like, that's great. So he melted my heart. And then another young man who kind of summed up and then went in for the pin to make the ask. And what was so beautiful about it was, they stepped up. That was great. But they modeled for the rest of the room, not just how you do it, but this is important to me as a young person in church. So if we're not talking about this may not be the church I want to be in.
Amy, as we conclude our time here together this afternoon, I have just one last question. Where have you seen the gospel lately in your work?
As you know, the ELCA has many global partnerships, and we accompany companion churches, communities all around the world through our World Hunger and Disaster Response programs. And I see every week, I sit at a grants table, and communities come with proposals that the ELCA steps up, and particularly in response to the executive orders that have come that have harmed communities, whether it is delivering vital HIV and AIDS program support and medications and care in Tanzania, or whether it is Meals on Wheels programs somewhere, or senior food. We've had all parts of the ELCA ecology come and say, could you come alongside us at this time as we try to make up this gap? As we've seen the freeze of the refugee resettlement program here, the ELCA has responded to places, to communities and to organizations that are trying to care for the people that they do have here who now have been cut off. And so as Lutherans, the theology of the cross means that we can't look away. We can't look away where there's suffering. We can't look away from the places where we see Christ continue to be in pain and suffering. And so this is one way, through generosity of people who may not know where these dollars go to. It's such a powerful witness to our faith that we are able to provide in these ways through stewarding what the church has together.
Beautiful. The Rev Amy Reumann, Senior Director of Witness and Society of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Thank you so much for being here, Amy.
Thank you, Regina. Thank you for your wise, persistent, thoughtful questioning and drawing out the best from everyone that you've interviewed.
The Lutheran Reformation bequeathed us with a remarkable set of confessions, or statements of faith. The Lutheran confessions are both evangelical and Catholic, meaning universal, in spirit. Evangelical because they emphasize justification by grace through faith alone, and Catholic because they assert that the gospel is essential for forming the church into one holy apostolic body. The complementary evangelical and Catholic nature of the confessions grounds our understanding of the unity of the Church, pointing to the present-day ecumenical work the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America has engaged in since its founding. The Augsburg Confession, often considered the most important foundational document of the Lutheran Church, acknowledges ecumenicalism because of its claim that the true unity of the Church is present where the gospel is rightly preached and the sacraments rightly administered. This claim encouraged Lutherans to live out the gospel along with other Christians throughout history. Before World War I, Lutherans from churches across Northern Europe and North America had a presence at the World Missionary Conferences, which brought together people from across the globe. By 1948, North American Lutherans played an essential role in the formation of the World Council of Churches, and nearly a decade later, Lutherans made up the largest confessional group of the Council. In 1965, ecumenical dialogue entered into a new phase as the Roman Catholic Church completed their Second Vatican Council, paving the way for an increase in dialogue, which culminated in 2017 with the Lutheran Catholic Common Commemoration of the Reformation. 1997 was the year in which the ELCA entered into full communion with the Presbyterian Church USA, the Reformed Church in America, and the United Church of Christ. Being in full communion indicates that two separate denominations have developed a relationship based upon a common confessing of the Christian faith and a mutual recognition of the sacraments of baptism and communion. The four churches work together to form a foundational document titled A Formula of Agreement, which expressed a desire to bear visible witness to the unity of the Church and the need to engage together in God's mission. Since that time, the ELCA has also entered into full communion with the Episcopal Church, the Moravian Church, and the United Methodist Church. The ELCA has also engaged in interfaith dialogue with different religious groups. In a 1994 declaration of the ELCA to the Jewish community, the document acknowledged the harm caused by Martin Luther's violent anti-Judaic and anti-Semitic rhetoric found in his later writings. The ELCA also issued a declaration to the Muslim community, which stated, "Anti-Muslim hatred is antithetical to our Christian faith and counter to Lutheran teachings, which focus on God's good news for the world and instill in us a love for our neighbor, the kind of love that casts out fear." Today, the ELCA works with dozens of other religious organizations in big and small ways. Neighbors across the country organize, worship, and create community in their local mosques, synagogues, and churches. And representatives of the wider church body participate in regular advocacy efforts to build a society which recognizes the Imago Dei in every person. The ELCA's companions, partners, and friends strengthen its work and create the necessary conditions for communal flourishing that continues to be guided by love and grace.
This is Kathryn Lohre. I serve as the executive for ecumenical and interreligious relations and theological discernment in the Office of the Presiding Bishop. In the last several weeks, if not months, the ELCA's role as a bridge builder among our ecumenical and interreligious partners has proven once again to be a really critical aspect of who we are and how we can engage in public space. Shortly following executive orders that had a significant detrimental impact on people who are refugees, migrants, and immigrants, Bishop Eaton convened those partners across the range of Christianity, including Catholics, Protestants, the Episcopal Church, and our evangelical brothers and sisters, together with Jewish and Muslim partners to see if we could explore common responses to the crisis that was unfolding. That group also included many of our organizations that work directly in the area of refugee resettlement. After sharing many updates and exploring the possibilities for common ground in early March, that interfaith group issued a solidarity statement on refugees and immigrants, affirming our shared commitments to the welcome to the stranger and to care for the most vulnerable living amongst us, really rooted in our different but common faith traditions, understanding of how God's love calls us to both love and serve our neighbors. The group continues to meet regularly to share those updates, to identify opportunities for cooperation and collaboration, and at least sharing of information. And further activities will be shaped in the coming weeks, especially as we approach World Refugee Day in June and move beyond that. Of course, our shared desire to impact policy through advocacy is taking shape on a regular basis as well. But through this kind of coalition, the ELCA is able to draw on the strength of our partners and our commitments as a church to both seek mutual understanding and to cooperate for the common good.
As we conclude this 10th episode of our podcast, Here I Pod, my favorite part of each interview has been asking the interviewees where they've seen the gospel. And I'd like to take just a minute to explain to you where I've seen the gospel recently, and that is literally in this podcast. In late January, all of our lives changed dramatically. All of us here in the United States, but also all of us on this Witness in Society's team, working lives changed. The work we do is already, in some cases, misunderstood and lonely and hard and in so many ways under-resourced. And then for things to look like so much more was going to be asked of us, and we didn't know if we were going to be equal to that task. And there was a lot of lament in this team for a while, fear and trepidation, and a lot of Good Friday and Holy Saturday feelings. And then the thought was, maybe we just need to tell more people about what it is that we're doing and get more people involved. Well, how do we do that? And this podcast was born of that. I get to sit down with a colleague of working people who made the decision to make just a little bit more work for themselves to bring people along in the work that we do. That is where I've seen the gospel recently. So as we conclude this season, I want to say that I am so grateful to everyone who's taken the time to do an interview with us, to record a segment, to let us know where they have been, in what part of the vineyard they've been working in. That has been the very best of the work that I've gotten to do this year, and it's where I've seen the gospel.
This concludes this episode and this season of Here I Pod. Links to a number of the resources mentioned by Amy Reumann can be found in the show notes. If you want to contact us, you can email us over at elcaadvocacypodcast@elca.org or leave us a voicemail at 866-740-3522. From everyone on the Here I Pod team, thank you very much for listening.